Hey Anchor Online, my name is Jonathan and I'm our video and tech director here at Anchor. We've got a few things coming up this week that we want you to know about. First, our Take Back Your Family book club, hosted by Sarah and Oliver French and Steve and Katie Masenko, will be hosted virtually this Wednesday, May 25th from 7:30 to 9 p.m. We also have two really big serve opportunities in two specific areas right now. The first being Kids Camp. So if you love working with kids, having fun, and teaching kids about Jesus, we would love to connect with you about getting plugged in and serving at Kids Camp from June 27th to July 1st. The next area is with our live stream team and production. We're so glad that we continue to see growth in our online community between Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we want to say thank you for your support and generosity. It's been hard to believe that it's been over 2 years since we started live streaming, and we've learned so much in so little time. But we're excited to finally have up a true live stream that we're running each and every week now. And that brings us to a big announcement. Anchor Online is going live. That's right, so instead of pre-recording our gatherings, we'll be going live each and every Sunday here at our Anchor Central location. So if you or someone you know loves camera gear, editing, running slides, or is just looking for a way to serve in the community without being in front of other people, we would love to connect with you about joining us and growing our reach to connect deeper with more people here in Tacoma, the greater South Sound, and even beyond. Everything that we do here at Anchor is made possible because of people like you serving and loving our community. So we want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart. Well, next up, we're going to spend some time together in worship, so do whatever you need to do to both prepare your space and your heart to worship God with us.
Of covenant, of faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven you do just what you said. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Is your faithfulness to me? Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, you are faithful, God.
God from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Your history can prove there's nothing you can do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak the word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness. setting same, I will praise your name. Rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. I will praise, I will
Hello and welcome to Anchor Online. My name is Tina.
And I'm Matthew.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey, it's good to see you, Tina.
Good to see you.
I've got a question for you.
All right, what is it?
If you're grabbing brunch after the gathering in person because you do attend Lincoln and you
do.
love brunch,
Yep.
where would you go?
Okay, so for brunch on a Sunday, it depends because our group kind of gets out of hand, meaning the size of the group. And so we have to constantly find a spot that we don't overuse so they're not annoyed with us.
Yeah, it's
based
good.
off,
Gotta be a good witness.
Yes, exactly. Tip well, eat well, be kind,
Yes.
be ready to order.
Live, laugh, learn.
Live, laugh, love,
Eat,
even.
love, pray.
All those things. Yes, good. Eat, drink, be merry. So I didn't answer your question because I was just background information. There's not a favorite spot, I'm gonna be honest with you, for brunch because we go to a place that can accommodate a bigger group. Then it's just all about community and accommodating, making sure everyone's welcome and included. So if you show up to Anchor Lincoln on a Sunday morning,
You might end up
invited.
at Denny's with Tina.
We haven't hit up Denny's yet. That's a good idea.
There you go. Add it to the list.
Yes.
Well, speaking of community and being connected, we
Yeah.
would love to connect with you. And so if you would, do us a favor, fill out that connection card. You can add your prayer request. That's where you can figure out more information about serving, our anchor groups, and just getting plugged in general. We want to do life with you. And so go ahead and fill that out. Also, if you have any questions about giving, you can ask those questions there. We believe that generosity is a key part of what it means to follow Jesus and be a part of his body, and knowing that our generosity leads to our vision of living for the good. We would love to invite you to be a part of living for the good. And so you can find the different ways to give on the screen right now.
Yep, that's awesome. Thanks, Matthew. We also have a few events coming up for the Women's Connection. So we have on Saturday, May 21st at Anchor Central, a craft and coffee meetup for the women. So just show up. There'll be coffee already here prepared for you. Bring a craft you're working on. If you don't like to do crafts but just want to hang out, get to know other women in the Anchor community, you're welcome to join us. And I keep looking at you, Matthew, but
I won't be there.
You won't be there. But
No.
you have a wife. You have women who are your friends.
Yes, that's
Invite
true.
them.
I will do that.
Okay,
Tina.
great.
Yes.
Thank you. Good. And so that'll be a really great time. And then also the next day is Women's Book Club. And
awesome.
so yeah, find out more information on our events page
What
for
book
those
are we
things.
reading in the book club?
Oh, great question. That can be found on the events page.
Nice. I love that, Tina.
Yes.
Check out the events
They're
page.
always switching it up every month. So
Cool.
time's flying. But
Awesome. I love it. Well, up next, before Brian's message, and as he continues in Real Religion, our series, I'd love to introduce to you the one and only video and tech director of Anchor Church, Jonathan Allison. Take a look at this.
Hey Anchor Online, my name is Jonathan Allison and I'm our video and tech director here at Anchor. We are so glad that we continue to see growth in our online community between Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we want to say thank you for your support and generosity. It's been hard to believe that it's been over 2 years since we started live streaming, and we've learned so much in so little time. But we're so excited to finally have up a true live stream running each and every week now. And that brings us to a big announcement. Anchor Online is going live. That's right, so instead of pre-recording our gatherings, we're going to be going live each and every Sunday here at our Anchor Central location. So if you or someone you know loves camera gear, editing, running slides, or is just looking for a way to serve in the community without being in front of other people, We would love to connect with you about joining us and growing our reach to connect deeper with more people here in Tacoma, the greater South Sound, and even beyond. Everything that we do here at Anchor is made possible because of people like you serving and loving our community. So we want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart. Well, next up, we're going to spend some time hanging out with Pastor John as we dive deeper into our teaching series, Real Religion. So grab a pen or pencil and somebody to take notes with, and join us as we learn about the topic of real community.
Well, good morning, Anchor. I'm actually not Pastor Brian. My name is Pastor John, and I get the absolute privilege of taking us through the last week of our Real Religion series. Now, if you've been with us for any part of this series, you'll know that we've been going through Isaiah 58 and looking at each of the verses in depth as we say, what does this mean for us as followers of Jesus today? And so if you've been paying close attention, you'll know that we've gone through all those verses in the Isaiah passage. And so you might be asking, those of you who are paying really close attention, John, what are we doing for the last week of this teaching series? Well, actually, there's a part in Jesus's life where he is teaching pretty early in his ministry, and he quotes a lot of the verses that we talk through in Isaiah. And so we're going to take some time and look at that moment in Jesus's life where he is teaching. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story from when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I joined the cross-country team as a freshman. Now, I want to say this. Pastor Brian was actually good at cross-country. I was not. I did cross-country because I had a lot of friends on the team that I loved hanging out with. We played ultimate frisbee after each practice, and it kept me in shape for wrestling season. But I still remember my first cross-country meet. I was walking the course as a team. And one of the things that our coaches said as we walked the course was, I want you to picture this in your mind. And I'll be honest, I didn't pay attention. Like, it was my first meet. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't think it was a big deal. And then we get back to the area at the start line, and we're stretching, and they say, okay, we're going to walk through that course again in our head. We're going to visualize how fast are you running. You're going to visualize where that turn is. You're going to walk and visualize through everything in your head. And I hadn't been paying attention, so I didn't do any of that. And my first race went fine. But then the next race we did the same thing, where we walked the course as a team, and I started to pay attention. I started to actually listen to my coach as he said, remember this turn, remember this section. As we picture this in your head, I want you to remember this. And then when we were doing that stretching again, I actually was able to listen and follow along when he said, visualize the race in front of you. And here's the crazy thing at the time, like, it actually helped. Getting through that process of looking and visualizing and imagining myself running and going through that race, it actually helped. See, I think there's something powerful that happens when we are able to actually visualize ourselves doing something, especially a sport that's so mental, like running. Or even wrestling was the same way. I think a lot of times we are better learners and we're better doers when we're able to visualize the thing that we are trying to do. And so one of the really cool things about how God told his followers to write the Bible is there are moments where we see God tell us something, and then in the person of Jesus, we actually get to visualize what does it look like when that is lived out. There's so many cool things about Jesus, but I think one of the absolute coolest things is this, that when we look at his life, we get answers to the question of, what would it look like if someone lived out everything that God asked of us? What would it look like for God himself to be on earth and interact with all of the broken parts of this world, just like we have to on a daily basis? So many times I've been talking to God and I've said this, God, would you just show me what you want me to do with this person? God, would you just show me how you want me to interact with the world? God, I just have a hard time seeing it. But some of you have probably said some similar things to God as well. But the more I study the Bible and the older I get, the more I realize that God's answer to that prayer, God's answer to my question or really statement to him, that God's answer is usually, John, I've already shown you. I walked on earth and had people write down how I interacted with the world. It's already been shown to you, John. You just haven't been paying enough attention. And that's so true. I think so many times in my life I've been guilty of not paying attention to the person of Jesus and looking to his example for how I'm supposed to live. And so that's why we added this week to the Real Religion series, is that I don't want us to miss that opportunity that we have. When we're talking about living out real religion, I think we have to look at the person of Jesus. It's one of the best ways for us to visualize how we're supposed to actually live out this teaching in Isaiah. So we're going to do that today. And so as we get into the teaching today, as we get into the real meat of this teaching, I want to start by looking at the main passage of scripture we're going to be going through today. The story we see about Jesus that we're talking through today, it's found in the book of Luke. Again, the book of Luke is named that because it was written by a man named Luke. Luke was a doctor who followed Jesus and wrote down what he saw from Jesus' life and ministry. The book of Luke is towards the beginning of the section of our Bibles called the New Testament. And so we're going to be partway through the 4th chapter in that book of Luke. So in Luke chapter 4, verses 14 through 21, it says this: Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of the sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This is really cool. Right before this, in Luke's account of Jesus' life, we see that Jesus had just come back from being tempted in the wilderness by Satan. All the most powerful temptations that we'll ever face in the world have been laid out at the feet of Jesus. And the devil said, "Take these, do these things, you deserve it." But Jesus turns away from all those temptations. And then he comes back and does Jesus stuff. He's teaching and healing and doing miracles, and he gets up in church and he starts to teach. And he unrolls this scroll from the prophet Isaiah, which is actually a quote of the passage that we spent the last month here studying. The passage in Isaiah that we've read is in chapter 58, verse 6, and this is what Jesus quotes. In Isaiah 58, it says this: "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke." That's what Jesus is quoting here. He's standing up in the church and he's quoting the prophet Isaiah. But then Jesus says something really important. He closes the scroll to make sure that there's no mistakes. This is not in the Old Testament. This is not from Isaiah. This is from Jesus himself. And he says this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Why is it fulfilled? Because of Jesus. He's standing up in a room full of church people who know the Bible inside and out and saying, "Hey, it's me. Like, I'm the one that all these prophecies are pointing to. And not only am I the answer to the prophecies about the Messiah or the Savior of the world, but I'm actually an answer to the prophecies that don't talk directly about the Messiah. I'm an answer to this prophecy as well." At another point in Jesus' ministry, he says this. He says, "I didn't come to get rid of the law, but to fulfill it." Jesus fulfills the scripture. He is the answer. He is the example. He is the one that we look to when we don't know how to follow what the Bible is asking of us. He is the fulfillment. That's so important. So if Jesus is the fulfillment of this Isaiah text that we've been studying for the last month, it means that we can look at the life and the ministry of Jesus and draw some real conclusions for how we are to actually live out real religion. And the first thing that I think we can draw out from Jesus' ministry is this: real religion is every day. Real religion is every day. In Luke 4, verses 14 and 15, it says this: "Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him." Now, this verse doesn't say that he was teaching every day, but when we look at all the accounts of how Jesus did his ministry, we can infer that it was pretty close to daily. In a lot of aspects of his ministry, it says he was traveling and a crowd followed him, or he went to a new area and a crowd immediately gathered. And so we see Jesus finding opportunities to minister every single place that he goes. Everywhere that Jesus went, he found opportunities to proclaim the good news that we don't have to do this whole life thing on our own anymore. He also gave opportunities to help those who truly needed help. And that's the thing about real religion is we believe this, it needs to be an everyday thing. Now, I'm not saying you're supposed to quit your job and wander the streets of Tacoma looking for people to help. I don't think we're all called to do that. I'm also not going to say you shouldn't do that, though. If God has put that on your heart, I think go and do it. Be wise, talk with wise people in your life who also follow Jesus about a life shift that big. But if God's put that on your heart, go and do it. A lot of times the church as a whole gets critiqued for hypocrisy. And to an extent, that's part of the deal of just life. We're always going to have inconsistencies in our lives. There's always going to be things that we want to be, that we want to do, that we fall short of. That's a part of life. But I think a lot of times churches get critiqued because, and I've done this in my life too, they do a one-off activity and feel really, really good and think that they've checked that box and done enough. Well, that's the one time a year you help at the soup kitchen, that one mission trip that you went on, that one time that you said, oh, hey, I was going to bring this bag of clothes to Goodwill, but actually I can bring it to the church instead because they're doing bringbacks, and you checked off that box, right? Like, it feels good. It's really easy to do something once or twice and feel good. And I think it should, because I think any amount of service that we do, any amount of living for the good should feel good. But I would contend that in this Isaiah passage that we see and in Jesus' teaching on it, that's not what God is asking. He's actually asking us for much more. Again, I'm not saying that we should all quit our jobs and start wandering the city of Tacoma, proclaiming the good news of Jesus and helping the poor and the oppressed the way that Jesus did. But I do think that we are being asked to examine our lives and find ways that we can really practice real religion every day. The first place that I look is this: where in my life do we have margin? Where in my life do I have margin? I think all of us actually have more margin than we realize. Sometimes we just don't want to make it enough. I'm this way. I've had moments where I was like, oh, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. And then a really cool opportunity that I was excited about came up that would take 8 hours of my week for the foreseeable future. I was like, yes, I have time for that. I made margin. Where did that come from? It came from me wanting it. Same thing, I sat with people who said, John, we are living paycheck to paycheck and we don't know what to do. We can't save up. Our finances are so tight and we just feel like we have no breathing room. And then one of them loses their job. They find margin. They change their spending habits. They change their life and they found margin because they had to. I think a lot of times, unless we really want to or unless we are forced to, it's easy for us to think that we don't have margin. But I would contend this, that we have more margin and we have more space in a lot of areas of our life than we think we do. Some areas that I would encourage us to look for margin or space to make a difference for those around us. The first is this: money. Where can your money go to make a difference? Is your money going somewhere that's making a difference? Maybe that's giving to a charity or an organization. Maybe it's helping out a family in your anchor group that you know is struggling. There are opportunities to help all around us. A lot of times those opportunities aren't as obvious as the homeless man sleeping under his coat on the sidewalk. Sometimes it's a single mom who doesn't know how she's going to put gas in the minivan this week without using the credit card again. And she's really hoping that the credit limit on her card is enough, but she's afraid to log in and check because she doesn't want the answer to be no. I think a lot of us know more people in that situation than we would realize. Maybe it's the person in front of you in line at the grocery store who's counting their dollar bills and starting to count quarters to see if they have enough for everything that they just put on the belt, and they realize they have to put a couple of things back. Maybe your money can go to that. How fun would it be to do this? How fun would it be to set aside a little bit of money each month just for random acts of real religion? For when that payday hits your account, you go to the ATM, you pull out some money and you keep it in an envelope, and you just know, that's my real religion fund. I'm just going to have that for when I see these moments. I think God goes in front of us. I think God gives us opportunities, but I also think that God rewards us when we plan. I think when we plan to be generous, we start to see opportunities to be generous. I think sometimes, though, we don't want to take advantage of these opportunities because it feels awkward or uncomfortable. I think sometimes it's easier to donate to the Anchor Cares Fund than it is to keep our eyes out for something God is asking us to do with our own words and actions. And yes, don't get me wrong, like I do the finances for this church. Donating to Anchor Cares is a good thing, but I think sometimes God's asking you to lean into an opportunity to be generous yourself instead of relying on the leadership of your church to be generous for you. I think we get to do both. We get to hold those things together. Another area we can look for margin is time. Man, pre-pandemic as a culture, we were struggling with overcommitment. And now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we're struggling again with overcommitment. I was talking with our teenagers at Anchor students last Sunday about this very thing, that too often we think we can do everything and we overschedule our lives and we realize that we have left no room for God to lean in on something new in our lives. I just think this, what would it look like for you to plan time to see what God has for you? So it can look like this, planning time to just walk around your neighborhood and see what God has put in front of you. Plan time to be what Anchor calls front porch people, where we're hanging out in the front area of our house because we might interact with a neighbor or someone who just comes down the street instead of hanging out in the backyard where we're never going to see anyone besides our own family. What would it look like to give time, not just to the least of these, not just by serving at the rescue mission, but to those who need help? Again, that single mom that you know that could really use a break. That foster family that you know who could really use respite care. What would it look like to find margin in our time? I think sometimes we need to find margin in our energy, to look and say, what does it mean to be fully present? To give your energy to being fully present in whatever room you're in, no matter how bored you might be. Brian talked last week at our central gatherings about what does it look like to create an environment where other people are able to rest. I think if we're not fully present, if we're not giving our energy, we're missing on opportunities to create space for other people. Finally, I think we can look at what's our margin socially. And here's what that looks like. To look around at a room, maybe it's a gathering on Sunday morning, maybe it's a small group that you're a part of, maybe it's a party or an event, and look around the room and not just ask the question, who is here, but ask the question, who isn't here? Who isn't here? Who doesn't have a seat at this table that I think should? Who has been pushed on the edges that needs an invitation to come and sit with me? I think part of real religion being everyday means looking at these areas that we deal with, that we budget things for every single day and figuring out what does it mean to budget or make space or margin for acts of real religion in these areas. The second thing that we see in Jesus when it comes to real religion is this, is that real religion is uncomfortable. Real religion is uncomfortable. Jesus made people uncomfortable. In Luke 4, starting in verse 28, this is after he said he proclaimed this, he does some few other things. It says this, all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up and drove him out of the town and took him to the brow of the hill in which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Now, obviously, this is an extreme example, but I think this real religion pokes at normal. Catherine Booth, who's the founder of the Salvation Army, said, if we are to better the future, we must disturb the present. And boy, did Catherine Booth disturb the present. She constantly spoke up for herself and especially for those who were in need. And it was at a time where women were discouraged from speaking up at all, let alone talking about those who were in need. But she pressed forward, she did those things, and we have the Salvation Army as a result of that. I think a lot of times real religion has to poke at normal. See, real religion says this. It says the things that our eyes have grown to accept are not acceptable to the eyes of God. The things that our eyes have grown to accept and become okay with are not acceptable or okay in the eyes of God. But we do that, right? I think a lot of times, I was showing someone around our auditorium here at our central building the other day, and there are these lights that we never use when we do gatherings here because they make this really obnoxious whirring sound. But they're easy, they're a light switch, the other ones take a computer, it's a whole thing, and so I just had them on when this person walked into the building. I was talking to him, I was like, yeah, we can get the other lights going for you because these are really annoying. He's like, what noise? See, he'd walked in and just heard the noise and he'd grown used to it, and then I turned the light switches off and it was deathly quiet. And he went, oh, that is a loud noise. You see, unless something happens, unless something disturbs normal, We get so used to broken things. We get so used to being accustomed to the brokenness, to the hurting parts of this world, that we think it's normal when God says that should never be okay. Pia Mellody wrote a book called Facing Codependence, which is really helpful if you're struggling with codependence or coming out of a codependent background. And in it, she talks about this idea that when someone's in a codependent relationship, they have created a new reality, basically, between them and whoever else is in this codependent relationship. And it says this, that they perceive anyone who's in touch with actual reality as a threat to their reality. I thought that was so interesting. I think a lot of times that's what happens when we practice real religion, is it makes people uncomfortable. You see, when we say, oh, actually, here's what God's asking us to do. Hey, God's actually asking us to give of our time, our talent, our treasure. That makes people who have gotten used to not doing that feel uncomfortable. Now, again, we talked about this at the very beginning. We talked about who the prophets are. Don't be a jerk. Right? I think a lot of times we have Jesus followers who just want to be a jerk and they're like, I'm practicing real religion. People are uncomfortable. Like, no, you're just a jerk. But there are ways that we can look to the people like Catherine Booth, like Jesus, like these prophets and say, no, that is proclaiming the truth of the Lord, and that is going to make people feel uncomfortable who've gotten too comfortable with their surroundings. Again, so we have to calibrate this, right? Like, don't be a jerk, but at the same time, don't be surprised that when we start to say the brokenness around us that we've gotten used to, God's not okay with that, that's going to make people uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes me uncomfortable. I think we need that. The last thing, though, that we see in Jesus and living out this Isaiah passage is that religion is what we call both and. Religion is both and. We use this phrase at Anchor of harbor base. We have that little slash line in between it. Sometimes we have two slashes because it feels more artsy. But our heart behind it is that a church has to be both a harbor and a base. What we mean by that is this: a church needs to be a place of refuge from the challenging environment of the world. But it also needs to be a base, which is a place of preparation to return back to that challenging environment of the world. It can't just be a place where we're a base and fueling up to go change the world without also being a harbor and providing shelter. At the same time, if we're just providing shelter and not returning back to the world, we're not actually living out into the calling that God has for us as Jesus followers. I remember being a youth pastor a few years back, and my youth group did this thing called the 30-hour famine, which is something that World Vision does, and it's an opportunity for students to not eat for 30 hours, do a youth lock-in, which is super fun, and also raise a bunch of money to help people who are starving around the world, which is a great cause. I remember I was there as the youth pastor, and one of my volunteers, Bill, was there, and Bill works full-time for World Vision. I remember a student asked us, they said, what's more important? Telling people about Jesus or feeding people who are starving? And they were asking the question I think a lot of times the church has asked itself for a lot of years: what's more important, someone's spiritual needs or someone's physical needs? One of the reasons why I love working with Bill, one of the things that I love about Bill is that he and I, we'd not practiced this, but we kind of looked at each other and we said, yes. Like, it's a both and. Here's the thing: real religion cannot just be acts of kindness and generosity to the poor. It cannot be just that. But real religion also cannot just be proclaiming words about the truth about Jesus or sharing the Bible. It has to be a both and. That versus, like, is it spiritual health or physical health? Is it spiritual health versus physical health? That's not helpful. That's not a helpful framework. That's not a helpful discussion. Any attempt to prioritize one or the other is doomed to fail. Jesus clearly lays out a mission statement for the importance of both. If you keep reading in chapter 4, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to read these verses, but I encourage you to read chapter 4, verses 31 through 40. You see some of Jesus' ministry. He clearly does both. Jesus is integrating acts that help people physically and help their social standing and free people from oppression and break chains with proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. I just think this, as Anchor, as we have said, we want to be a harbor-based church. Can we be a both and church? Can we be a church that when people say, what's more important, sharing the gospel or taking care of people's needs, we say yes. We say yes. I think all of us probably have one of those areas that we tend to lean in than the other. For me, it's funny, I'm a preacher, and in a church setting, I'm very comfortable teaching. When I'm in a non-church setting, I would much rather meet someone's needs than tell them about Jesus, which is interesting. I'm a pastor, I do this all the time, but that's just, I get uncomfortable. I think there are others who are say, I am very comfortable talking about my faith and proclaiming the good news of Jesus, but I get kind of uncomfortable when I have to interact physically with people and help them in their physical needs. I think all of us have one way that we kind of lean towards. And so my encouragement to you is this: would you lean into the other one just for a little bit? I think in doing so, you're going to find balance, and you're going to find your way to being a both and person as Anchor seeks to be a both and church. Here's the cool thing about both and is that Jesus is a both and as well. I'm really excited for the next teaching series that we're going to be doing. It's called Future People, and we're looking at the book of Revelation. Because Jesus is the most interesting and the biggest fulfillment of a both and. When people saw Jesus or they saw the ministry of Jesus, they'll ask the question, did Jesus come to save us from sin or to defeat sin for eternity? And the answer is yes, both and. You see, Jesus has fulfilled these prophecies that we see from people like the prophet Isaiah and other prophets in our Old Testament that say there's going to be someone who's going to be born and live a perfect life and die and 3 days later rise again, and doing so provide a way for forgiveness for our sins. But the really cool thing about Jesus is that those same prophets wrote down prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled in our time. Those prophets wrote down prophecies that said this, that Jesus is going to return. He's going to come back, and when he does, he's going to make all things new. And we're going to get rid of all brokenness. There'll be no more pain, no more sadness, no more sorrow. And here's the really cool thing. We saw these prophets write prophecies that Jesus already fulfilled. And so we have great faith that the prophecies that they've written, that they said will be fulfilled when Jesus returns at the end of time, we believe that will happen. We don't know when, but we have faith and assurance that will happen, that there will be a day where Jesus comes back and says there's no more tears, there's no more sorrow. I'm so excited as we spend the next few weeks ahead diving into what that's going to look like and what does that mean for us as we live our lives today. I'm excited for you guys to keep following along with us and being a part of our community as we go through that series starting next week.